Коллеги, всем доброе утро. Мы начинаем наш вторничный семинар. Сегодня он пройдет на английском языке без перевода, поэтому я переключусь на английский, если позволите. Morning, everyone, and welcome for today's HEC Open Seminar in Education at the Institute of Education. My name is Maxim Nikitin, and I'm very pleased to moderate today's session. Today's session will be conducted in English because we have an honorary guest from Hong Kong. So today's topic is critical generative AI literacies in language teacher education and development, three multiple case studies in Hong Kong. Could hardly be more timely, I would say. And in just a short time, generative AI tools have become deeply embedded in how we learn, write, and teach. And for language educators, this creates both opportunities and tensions. So, how do we help future teachers engage with AI critically rather than just instrumentally? How does AI shape teachers' professional identities and what kinds of literacies are needed to navigate this landscape? And the seminar brings together perspectives that connects technology, identity, and teacher development, showing how AI literacies is not just a set of skills, but a social and critical practice. And now let me introduce our speaker and discussants, Dr. Yue Zhang, or Ellen, if I may, Assistant Professor of Educational Linguistics in the Department of English Language Education at the Education University of Hong Kong. Very nice to see you, Ellen, today. Thank you for joining us today. We have two discussants, Nazir Jagizai, Assistant Professor at the Institute of Education at HEC University, and Alessa Petrenko. She's a research fellow at the Laboratory for University Development, Institute of Education, HEC University. Before we begin, let me briefly remind everyone of the schedule. We have 40 minutes for the Ellen's presentation. Then we have 10 minutes for clarifying questions. Then there is time for our discussions, about 20 minutes. And after that, there will be an open discussion part. And of course, wrap up and closing remarks. For those joining us in Zoom or YouTube, please feel free to leave your questions in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to speak during the discussion. We also ask all participants in Zoom to keep their mics muted unless you are speaking. And finally, please maintain a constructive tone during the discussion. Our goal is for sure to learn from another and reflect together in this evolving topic. With that, it's my greatest pleasure to give the floor to Alan, Dr. Yue Zhang. Please, Alan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maxine. Thank you. Really, thanks for the invitation and the kind introduction and everything. Right. So, yeah, let's get started. Now, let me share my screen first. Can you all see the screen? See my slides?
Yep.
Thank you so much. Right, so it's really my pleasure to share with you here today some of my own research about critical generative AI literacies in language teacher development and also education. And in one study, we also include pre-service teachers of different majors, not just language teaching. So hopefully we can have a fruitful discussion, right? So actually, let me introduce the outline of my talk today. I will set the stage first, introducing the literature review, background information, everything. And I probably only have time to introduce two of my empirical studies to you. So yeah, I hope you like it. Right, so let's talk about the problem first, right? So if I believe that all of you are very familiar with, GenAI studies. And first of all, we look at a review of 500 articles about generative AI and second language teachers. This article actually reveals that teachers' actual use of GenAI tools, especially pre-service teachers, are quite limited, actually, to some extent. Some pre-service teachers have serious concerns over their over-reliance on the tools, like maybe using generative AI will create threats to their data privacy, and they receive insufficient training, and also they also observe algorithmic bias. So actually, we say that GenAI is not neutral. There are some biases, stereotypes, discrimination, such issues in the trained data because GenAI relies on social media, internet data, right? So it creates changeable, like very complex and non-neutral outputs. Therefore, we really need a critical lens in teacher education, or we say pre-service teacher (PST) education, that involves critical reflection, thinking skills, and design that promote equity, not just language equity, but educational, cultural equity in learners' access and use to and of generative AI. And also, because the GenAI output can present diverse cultural representations, and we need to also pay attention to which cultural groups, knowledge, norms, and values are highlighted in GenAI output. And also, we need to be aware of the ethical use of GenAI. So we also notice that we have currently most of the time when people use GenAI, they have like a very limited or even no understanding of the algorithms. So GenAI users need to determine by themselves to the extent to which GenAI algorithm is fair, unbiased, and ethical. Because we talked about this, is the algorithm and the tools themselves are not unbiased, right? So it really relies on individual users to do that. And GenAI output is based on data gathering from existing societal ideologies and discourses that can include biases, stereotypes, prejudice, and etc. etc. So actually, we actually incorporate diverse voices and also advocate for non-normative identities and language practices or educational practices, teaching practices in AI that could reduce its inbuilt biases to some extent. So in actually teaching and learning practices, we really look forward to, reducing the biases that are already there embedded in AI algorithm. That's why our critical lens is important in nowadays use of AI. So we really need to also distinguish between...
Ellen, I'm very sorry to interrupt you. We're having some audio issues. Could you please check your mic because we can't hear very well. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. How about
Oh,
now?
yeah. Great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for your reminder. Thank you. Yes, we really need to also distinguish between the regular AI and the generative AI. Actually, when we use, for example, translational tools and we use Siri from our Apple phones, we are using regular AI, and it's programmed with fixed responses that are reliable, that is consistent, that is predictable. Like if you ask the same question to Siri using different devices, it will give you the same results, right? But for generative AI, it has a multitude of parameters and it can produce unpredictable results because the data can be trained, polluted, etc. Right? So it has very uniquely reconstituted digital artifacts. And it can produce, very biased output because it's based on our internet, our social media data, without, purposeful selection. So the challenge is now like users have mixed feelings of incompetence or loss of control when they're using generative AI. And they can experience technological stress and anxiety. That's more a psychological perspective. And they experience ethical issues such as data privacy, academic integrity. I believe that all of us are very familiar with this, right? We can be concerned of how our students actually use GenAI. And we have we see technical difficulties, challenges while negotiating teachers' relationships with technology use. And students, teachers, they experience identity conflicts when they're using it, like whether I can be replaced by it, etc. And also we see GenAI models can reproduce such biases from our use because it's based on the data that they are trained on, and the data themselves actually have, stereotypes, prejudices, cultural assumptions, and they are not neutral. So users need to develop critical digital literacies as the pedagogical goal for them to recognize and challenge these biases, right? It's not just language learning, reading and writing skills. No, it's actually the practices that students are engaged in or teachers are engaged with when they are using GenAI tools. So without such skills, GenAI can reinforce, existing power structures and inequalities because we use the data without a critical awareness. Now I'm going to introduce the theoretical model that I adopted in the two studies, right? So it's called the model of L2 investment, established by Professor Ron Darwin and Professor Bonnie Norton from UBC, Canada. right? So at the very center is the notion of investment, and it has three different components. The first one is identity, how we understand ourselves and how we understand our relationships to the world with AI tools, etc. So we say that identity shapes how individuals interact with the world and envision possibilities. Actually, in the age of AI, maybe students and teachers can reimagine a wider range of identities because AI creates, or GenAI actually creates more opportunities, right? And the second component is called capital. So occupying new GenAI spaces will involve acquiring new material or symbolic resources and the capital, for example, social capital, our relations with powerful others, and our economic capital, like education opportunities, training opportunities, and also our cultural capital, whether our own local language, culture can be valued in our use of GenAI, that our learners, teachers already possess, and also as affordances. The final one is ideology. It's more about educational ideology. Like GenAI output can reflect some dominant ideologies, right? Because AI tools are developed in certain regions, and such ideologies may not necessarily reflect the local value, the local norms, and the local culture, right? So that's making critical engagement essential for resisting inequities. Right. So as convergence of both digital and critical literacies, this CDL actually examines how the operation of power within digital contexts can shape knowledge, identities, social relations, and formations in different ways that privilege some and marginalize others. Right, so if we really think about this, GenAI tools are trained and developed in certain regions. So the developers actually use the internet, the social media data of the certain region. And if our teachers and students use such data and GenAI output without critical digital literacies, we may reproduce what they expect us to know, right? So this is why the critical lens matters. It actually equips learners with the tools to examine the linguistic and non-linguistic, so language and non-language features of GenAI tools to identify their embedded biases and assumptions so that to access the truth. So CDR actually is defined as how digitally mediated interactions, like GenAI human interactions, and semiotic productions, like we use AI to produce texts, images, videos, can reflect and reproduce relations of power. So this notion will enable us to analyze and challenge GenAI-generated content and develop critical awareness of how power operates in such space. And GenAI can also shape teacher education programs, but a lack of critical awareness and reflection in pre-service teachers' use of GenAI has been found. So that's why we need to develop the critical awareness and also CDL. So let's take a look at the two studies. So the first one, I worked with Professor Michelle Gu, our vice president, and also Professor Lai Chun from the Hong Kong University of Hong Kong, right? So in this study, we examined the role of pre-service teachers, not just language teachers, actually teachers of different subjects, and their identity and investment in learning to teach practices when they are developing, AI literacies. Right, so this study actually aims to explore 5 undergraduate PSTs, GenAI literacies, and how such literacies are shaped by pre-service teachers' identity and also capital. So we asked the following 3 questions. Number 1, what are such GenAI literacies? Number 2, how do they perceive GenAI tools? Like, are they very useful? And what are the constraints when they are learning to teach? And finally, how do their identity and access to resources shape such literacies, right? So it's in the context of Hong Kong, right? So it's in the public university in Hong Kong, and we adopt a multiple case study approach. So the data includes 1, a survey. It's to elicit 5 focal cases and collect their initial profiles. And we conducted one-to-one Zoom interviews. We collected their learner artifacts, like screenshots of their GenAI tools, and we used thematic analysis to analyze the data. Right, so here are our 5 interviewees. As you can see, they have very diverse backgrounds, like different gender, age, language background, year of study, degree, major, length of teaching also vary, level of teaching also vary, right? So we hope that we can collect a more holistic picture from this study, right, to reflect their different identities.
So the first finding is that pre-service teachers invest in GenAI literacies in Hong Kong. Right, so they resort to GenAI tools such as ChatGPT and Poll for number 1, pedagogical advice, number 2, grammar check, number 3, content creation. But they rely very heavily on GenAI tools, like they respect GenAI as experienced teachers and also experts, language and education experts that can provide feedback for them as very creative content generators. If we look at the interview data, they actually perceive GenAI to be very advanced, like they are smarter than human beings. They produce more advanced knowledge, and the content and output is juicy, and AI is clever, and they produce native-like even content and correct their essays. So actually, not just English, but also Chinese even. They even skim and scan materials for the teachers so that they don't have to do it, because the teachers position themselves as new practitioner in the profession, right? So whereas AI is very experienced. But we see problems in such practices. For example, Terry was dealing with a bullying incident, right? So the child in his own class said that, no wonder you don't have parents, to child B. So he was a teacher in a teaching practicum at that time, right? So how he dealt with that was that he told child A that it was wrong, and he said that in front of the whole class, and he made him stand and calm down for a while, and then he called child B, the victim, outside and had a private conversation with him. And he asked AI, was it right? And AI said something like, it's essential to remain calm and composed. And number 2, speak with the child who made the comment privately. Now you see the difference, right? While Terry did it in front of the entire class to show that bullying should be stopped, AI asked him to do it privately, right? So, and AI only suggested him to talk to the abuser, so child A, who made the problematic account. So we say that actually in this case, we probably all know that Terry was right, whereas AI was wrong, because we need to tell our students that bullying should be stopped, and we need to let other students also know about the importance, right? And we also need to comfort child B, the victims, instead of just talking to child A, right? So actually in this case, even though Terry believed that AI has a point, from our perspective, maybe Terry was right. Right, and this is actually not the single case. If we look at this one, right, so the pre-service teacher asked AI to correct the grammar, and if we look at the explanation, I changed house to a house because a house is a specific noun phrase that refers to one specific house, whereas house on its own is a more general term, blah blah blah. Actually, this is a very problematic explanation, because we say that house is a countable noun which cannot stand alone, right? As in a sentence, right? And this is reason 1. And we have specific here, not necessarily so, right? So actually, is not specific, the is specific, right? So, and actually we can see the explanation is very lengthy and it's problematic, it's very complex, and it's simply wrong. Right, so we say educationally, linguistically, AI can create stuff that are inappropriate. Let's take a look at how pre-service teachers perceive such, affordances and constraints. Actually, for example, Iris believed that before AI, she used Grammarly, and before Grammarly, her English was terrible, which was not the case actually. And she was very anxious to write in English independently. And right now, even with the help of AI, she felt even more anxious because she relied too much on AI. So without it, she cannot write, right? So it's actually creating challenges for pre-service teachers, even though it may seem that it facilitates their learning. And they even use AI to generate, lesson plans for them, right? So they consulted GenAI like such abusing cases like Terry's case that we just seen. And we see that it's problematic in terms of ethical use, right? So for example, even though GenAI can produce something that is wrong, pre-service teachers blame themselves, right? So for example, Terry would say something like, he turned AI from artificial intelligence to artificial moron. It's his fault, not GenAI, because he has a problematic way of questioning. So actually, they trust AI so much so that they even blame themselves when they got the wrong answer. And even this is the case for Iris, like she observed that her students are starting using AI to cheat. during the teaching practicum. And Eva, for example, she believed that if I copy and paste from another scholar, and maybe this is plagiarism, but if I copy and paste from AI, it's not a person, right? So then can we still call it plagiarism? So we see that there are ethical concerns, like in the use of pre-service teachers, in pre-service teachers' use of AI, right? So their dispositions, their beliefs are starting to develop to be problematic. And we see that actually they use AI not just as pre-service teachers, for example, here, they use AI to create lesson plans, and they even use AI as, scholars or researchers. For example, the pre-service teacher asks AI to summarize for him and explain the educational approach, and even basic stuff like steps to do scanning for children. They rely on AI. So from the very top-down educational theory or approach to the very specific teaching strategies, they rely on AI. Right? And even grammatical issues. So the content knowledge, they even rely on AI. Right. So we see that actually it's also problematic in terms of the economic capital that the use of GenAI can create inequity. For example, some students have some digital devices, whereas others don't. Some need the VPN to access some AI tools, others don't. And some have the premium version of, for example, Grammarly or ChatGPT. Others don't. So it's about their economic capital. So students don't have the opportunities to use AI in an equal way. It's the same for social capital, right? So if we look at this, some of them, have knowledge about GenAI because others taught them to do so, whereas other students may not have such social capital, such relations to knowledgeable person. So again, it's about inequity, right? So to sum up, actually we see that the use of GenAI is among pre-service teacher actually is very problematic to some extent, but we also see pre-service teachers negotiating different identities when they're using GenAI tools. For example, they become multilinguals. In Hong Kong, it's English as medium of instruction, so it's English only, and only English can be used. But if students start to use AI, right, so when they're using AI, they can use their first languages, such as Chinese. So this is creating a translanguaging space so that they can use different languages as resources. And they also use it as future teachers, right? They perceive effective cognitive and pedagogical support. But on the other hand, we see over-reliance on it, right? And they also use AI as English learners, content creators, right? And we move on to capital. We just talked about that, right? So it's a very unequal use because students have different, social, economic, and cultural capital. And finally, ideology, right? So we managed to shift from the English-only policy to translanguaging, like students can use their mother tongue in GenAI practices. Pedagogically, it also encourages students to engage with critical thinking and problem solving to some extent only, right? So we see it's very problematic when pre-service teachers are over-relying on generative AI. Right, so let's move on to the second study. And in this study, I work with Professor Keenan DeKilitas. He's from University of Oregon, a professor of education, right? So if we look at the title, it's the same theoretical framework, and we also focus on literacies, but right now we focus on critical from a more explicit perspective, right, in the use of GenAI. Right, so we focus on second language novice teachers now. So this study actually explores two novice teachers' investment in CDL practices. We ask, to what extent do novice teachers, so no new teachers, invest in their teacher identities and in their teaching and learning practices involving GenAI? And how does this investment create opportunities for the development of CDL as a potential new educational goal, right, or educational objective in current learning and teaching programs? Right, so then why do we focus on novice teachers? Because we believe that when novice teachers learn to teach, it's more like they are newcomers who interact with established members of a community, which are experienced in-service teachers like you, right? And they need to become increasingly experienced through the possibilities enabled by the systems of relations with a community of practice, we say teaching practices, teaching communities, right? Through this process, the novice are able to construct knowledgeable skilled identities in practice. This is how they develop from novice to experienced, right? So actually they need to claim legitimacy, right, by being a peripheral member of the community to a more central one. But we see that for them to develop such agency, they also need to negotiate certain social structures, right? So in sociology, people believe that there are always constraints and also affordances, for example, of GenAI. They coexist simultaneously. And for GenAI users and novice teachers to develop agency as the creation, the recreation, and the transformation of social structures, they need to negotiate, right? So constraining and marginalizing or empowering or enabling features of GenAI platforms or in the society. And learners or GenAI users actually transgress different norms and expectations from their important others. For example, learners learn from teachers, and pre-service teachers learn from experienced teachers, and they exercise agency through their desires for new identities. For example, pre-service teachers, novice teachers desire to be experienced teachers, which are their new identities. However, there are structures like structures of GenAI tools and also the community, the classroom, the society that can comprise these rules and conventions that are controlled by powerful others. For example, GenAI tools were developed by different developers, right, based on data collected from a specific region, not necessarily relevant to your own context, right? So this is when we need to take a critical lens, right? For example, native speakerism. When we learn English, when we use English, we rely on English-speaking countries, for example, the US, the UK, to create norms and rules that guide learning and teaching practices in job markets, that can influence online teaching platforms, that can even shape teacher recruitment spaces, like native English teachers are more well paid, and collaborative platforms and AI algorithm. We see that too. If you use English to talk with AI, necessarily AI will provide output that privileges one variety of English or certain cultural groups, not necessarily your groups, right? We also see tensions existing in novice teachers developing to be experienced. For example, we say policies, specific social contexts and conditions, and institutional structures that can all shape novice teacher development. For example, in my own study, right? So I frame non-native users of English. We should not actually view non-native users like whose mother tongue or first language is not English as a necessarily less competent English users than native English teachers or learners or users, because we see education as a part of the social conditioning, dispositions and practices that remain doable. Right? So how we learn English and how we use our mother tongues will necessarily influence how we use English. It's our identity marker. It's not something that to be removed. For example, in YouTube, you probably can see videos like shadowing technique. How can you sound like a native speaker? They will provide you with training that remove your accents. Actually, we say that it's not meaningful because everyone speaks with an accent. American speakers speak with an American accent, right? So Chinese speakers speak with a Chinese accent, and it's all equal. They are just different varieties of English, right? So for novice teachers, this is more serious because what such new career or early career teacher values as good teaching can be rejected by senior colleagues. For example, like colleagues who are native speakers, colleagues who are experienced and does not like his or her, pedagogical approaches. That's why we need to focus on novice teachers, because they are powerless groups, relatively powerless, right? Then they actually can develop agency through negotiating their language teacher or teacher identities, right? So through teacher leadership, collaboration to bridge agency and structure, develop commitment and competence and autonomy, etc. So this is also relevant to investment. The model that we just talked about is about structure and agency, how they operate across time, right, and space, and can accord or refuse learners or novice teachers the power to speak or sometimes use AI, right? So let's take a look at the model again, right? So agency and identity are actually intertwined. Agency plays a key role in helping teachers navigate identity tensions. For example, whether I am a user of GenAI, I'm a learner from GenAI, right, etc. Whereas constructing ideal future identities foster such agency. when teachers or learners use AI, they need to develop a sense of agency. And how can we do that? So we will look at the results. Right. It also responds to this research task called by Professor Peter da Costa and Professor Bonnie Norton, right? So with reference to a designated group of diverse learners or teachers, study to what extent this model can serve as a useful tool for the analysis of intersectionality, meaning that teachers and learners have intersected identities as AI users, as learners from AI, right? So they are different identities, right? So we can use the model to see how they're different. Right, so here are our participants. We only have two, right? So one male novice teacher and a female novice teacher. The male novice teacher is actually very experienced. He has a PhD in education, won different scholarships, and he's the president of the local pre-service teacher association. Right, and we have another one, Jane. She's from mainland China, and she's in a master's program, right? Also a very experienced teacher. Let's look at the findings. Ray, actually the very experienced male novice teacher, as you can see, his identity is grounded in traditional theory-based teaching. So he highlighted like my identity as a researcher, I know a lot of theories, I can help my future students. Meaning that he didn't actually value GenAI. He has very limited integration of GenAI in his practices because he believed that he's already very prepared and very experienced with his own knowledge, with his degree, with his studentship, scholarship, and everything, right? So he didn't actually value AI. For example, he said that I have several publications. I know TBLT. I know papers. I have published papers on the real educational issues in Hong Kong. AI may not necessarily know that, right? So he said that I'm quite confident about my own teaching philosophy and practices. I need to show my students my credibility, like my PhD degree. And he also aligned with an ideological discourse that prioritizes a traditional teacher identity. So he rejected AI to a certain extent, right? So he observed his own lecturers and teachers in secondary school using lacking basic GenAI literacies. So he believed that teachers in Hong Kong, pre-service teachers in Hong Kong, students in Hong Kong are not ready for using generative AI. Why so? If we look at the answers, a minority of them could be very proficient and competent, but there must be a lot that know nothing about how to use AI properly, or they just use it superficially like a search engine. So they use AI in the same way as they use Google, right? Or just to do the Q&A, like what's the synonym of something? This is also very true as you can see from the results in the first study that I shared. They don't know how to use AI to facilitate their lesson planning. They just use AI to create lesson plans. AI's ability is no different from normal people for that. They just use AI like everyday use, right? So this is his own use of AI, right? It's just to proofread something that can be done using, translational tools, Grammarly, or with a grammar tutor in the real life world. So his access to GenAI related teacher training is also constrained. Right, so he was very diligent. He has attended 1,500 hours of teacher training during his study, but none of them was about generative AI, right? So, and I asked why, and he said that because AI literacy is not included in the formal curriculum in his university, and there are some workshops about them, but they are only free for experienced teachers who are in a real school, right? So whereas he was in a PhD program, even though he has teaching experiences in the local secondary schools. And he managed to demonstrate a certain level of critical lens. For example, unlike novice teachers who may rely on GenAI tools because they position GenAI as native English speakers, Ray actually said that I don't ask GenAI tools to make the language native-like, which is not my goal. I'm not a native speaker, and it's not necessary for me to develop native-like competence because he embraced language diversity. So this is also a very important critical digital literacy that he developed. And if we take a look at another case, so Jane, her professional identity is shaped by her proactive approach to using and exploring GenAI tools in her teaching in mainland China. So we say that actually she valued AI to a large extent. She imagined herself as a practice-oriented, not a theory-oriented teacher, right? So she also wants to be a tech-sensitive teacher in mainland China. So she attached great importance to GenAI use, and she attended our GenAI pedagogy workshops actively, right? So dedicated to systematically building her knowledge and expertise in GenAI enhanced ELT. So although she humbly described her own literacies as, still in the early stages, actually her consistent actions reveal a deliberate shift from the traditional teacher identity to a GenAI identity. So she volunteered to sign up for an AI workshop before and learn some of the underlying logic of AI. And this historical development trend, it may be reached to the level of human beings, right? So, or the level of human learning or the level of human creativity. So we see that she was also very, very active and positive about GenAI and its output. Right, so mastering it faster and better than others actually becomes a pedagogical goal or a learning goal for her as a learner and a teacher. So it's the case in James, right? So even though both of them, both their universities can provide free AI tools for novice teachers to use, Jane's use of GenAI tools is constrained by her limited economic capital, actually, and facilitated by her social capital. If we look at the interview transcript, you can see that. So Doubao, this is the Chinese version of ChatGPT. It can help her develop some translational skills, and these may be free, and you can see that. But ChatGPT may be difficult to obtain in mainland China, and she cannot afford, the service of ChatGPT. In class, her group member told her to use Poll because it's more convenient. So it's about social capital, right? Your relationships to people who are knowledgeable and people who can provide you with resources. And finally, Jane found GenAI tools useful in generating equitable and meaningful output with carefully designed prompts, right? So we already know that GenAI is not neutral. It can produce, a biased output. For example, if you ask it to generate fashionable outfit or fashionable people, you can try that. ChatGPT and other text-to-image GenAI tools will create only white and young and tall images, right? So we say this is racial to some extent. Whereas if you prompt it as domestic helpers, it will necessarily be South Asians, right? So we see such stereotypes in GenAI output as well. And we cannot teach our students to use AI without a critical awareness. Otherwise, we can be reproducing such ideologies embedded in the output. Right. So then, for example, in her case, when she was designing her lesson plans and she wanted to use AI to create images to avoid, copyright issues, and she prompted as black, including black and male and female, black and female parents, or we say teachers in the case of people working with children, right? So because the original image is necessarily white and it's necessarily female, right? So this is the final takeaway of the second study. So we developed this model based on our two cases. So L2 teachers, actually novice teachers, invest in generative AI critical digital awareness from 4 different dimensions, right? So the first 2 are from the model of investment. As you can see, identity and capital are important, right? And the second 2 components are indexicality and materiality. Right? So we say novice teachers negotiate teacher and social identities, voices, and positioning while they are examining how the use of GenAI and their output can index specific conceptualizations, dispositions, and ideologies that may not accord with native novice teachers. Right, so we need to examine the output. Do they really accord with your local value and culture and context? Because we know GenAI tools are developed by others in different social contexts, right? So it may be about the privilege, the value, and the benefits of different cultural groups. cultural group. Right, so we also see that race case shows that when GenAI CDL was not a pedagogical goal, novice teachers can divest in such GenAI facilitated practices, reinforcing their conceptualization of a traditional good teacher who does not need AI, whereas Jane's journey illustrates a more agentive and reflective navigation of ideological challenges brought by GenAI. So recollect scaffolded support like social capital or formal training opportunities, which is a part of their his cultural capital, which constrained his ability to critically examine or meaningfully use GenAI tools. So race, economic, and institutional contexts did not provide equitable access to tools or training, which in turn reinforced his marginal position in the evolving digital teaching settings. So he will develop to be a teacher without GenAI critical digital literacies. On the other hand, we see Jane, another side of story, right? Her own ideological stance can be reinforced by reprompting with GenAI to create what she believed to be right and appropriate. So she imagined herself to be a competent GenAI user in her imagined teaching community, and she engaged actively with GenAI tools. Right, so that would be the end of my talk today. Thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for listening. If you're interested, please contact me by scanning these QR codes. You can for sure always email me if you have any questions, if you want to collaborate, if you want to talk. Yeah, anytime. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Helen, for this insightful and very concise presentation. We'll now take a few minutes for understanding questions. So colleagues, short clarifying questions about the presentations before we move to the discussions. Oh, we have one question already. Just thank you. Very interesting presentation, Anastasia.
Thank you so much.
So colleagues, if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I guess there are no questions. That is why we can move to our discussions. Maybe Alessia could be the first one. Alessia, please.
Hello, hi everyone. Hi Ellen, thank you very much for your fascinating presentation. And I really like that you've addressed a lot of things in this short presentation. So first I will highlight a few points that I really enjoyed, and I will maybe talk about something and ask questions, and you will decide what you can reflect on or comment on. So the first thing, I really like the theoretical approach that you talked about the L2 investment, because it brings about some theoretical framework that can be used for language learning. The next part would be educational polarization. Actually, recently I've read an article on Chinese students. So it's the students' side of the question of learning experience, and it was dedicated to learning physics at a high school. The study was provided. I think the study was done on the mainland China, and they said that the findings were that the better students were actually worse off by using generative AI, even though the practice of the school was that the students were not allowed to use generative AI. So the experiment was conducted over a year because it needed to include a lot of things. So they needed actually to print out every single piece of information and distribute the handouts among the students for each stage of the experiment. So I think I admire the fact that you've done this all this work with teachers, because I think it really needs a lot of time and a lot of preparation. So my question in this context would be about students and teachers. To what extent do you think generative AI practices influence educational polarization? What sort of students are better off and worse off according to your research, and what teachers are better off and worse off using Gen AI of course, there is no like overall answer to the question, but it would be interesting to know your opinion based on the work that you have done. The second thing that I would like to mention, it would be the advantages and limitations that transformative Gen AI brings for novice teachers. So the things that probably were mentioned in the first part of your presentation, what did teachers note to be the main critical advantages of Gen AI and critical limitations? So if we now bring it closer to our educational environment and the university, you were mentioning teachers working in multilingual classrooms. So we often teach English to a mix of international students, and undoubtedly Hong Kong is also a densely populated, internationalized place to study for many students. So each speaks different languages, and also teachers speak different languages in class. So it reflects their cultural references and their learning needs. So my third question would be, how can novice teachers practically use Gen AI to move beyond the textbook and maybe create some personalized, culturally responsive learning experiences for their students in case they are not the native speakers of the language they teach? Yeah. And lastly, you mentioned also the native speakerism, and I really like the fact that you've reflected it in the conversation or in an interview that you held with Ray, and he mentioned that he wouldn't like to develop native speakerism. It's not what the students are expecting of him or he is expecting from himself, and it also matches quite well the theoretical framework that you have built, having explored the interviews with the two people that you mentioned in the second part of your presentation. So thank you very much for this insightful work, and I look forward to your comments on that, and I look forward to reading more articles of yours. So good luck with all your assignments that you have on you right now.
Thank you really so much for your warm encouragement, for your questions, comments, everything. Really appreciate it. So I will try my best to address questions. So firstly, actually, the investment model can also be adopted in educational studies. Actually, it has been done so, right? In teachers' investment in different identities, not just language identities, like teacher identities, how to develop different capital and also negotiate ideologies. It's more like actually sociological model that has been applied to our field, actually. Yeah, and also the second question, if I remember it correctly, is about what kind of teachers or students are more prepared, ready for the use of Gen AI, who can benefit most from it. So for sure, I would say that English speakers can benefit. I won't say for sure, maybe English speakers will benefit the most from it, English as a first language speakers, because generative AI tools are mostly trained based on English data, right? So even though we can use other languages with generative AI, sometimes it involves a translating process, which may influence the results or output, actually. And also we see most general tools are developed using, social media data and also internet data collected from a certain region, like most likely favoring, Anglo-Saxon context. So the output is similarly, right? So for example, if we prompt our Gen AI and ask it to correct our English, it will likely privilege American English. You can try that, right? So for example, if you give it a student essay and ask it to grade it for you and ask it to give evaluation, in my own research, my ongoing research, it actually can privilege American English because it will give corrections that highlight American English is the standard use of English. But if we move beyond the language level, it will mean that the AI output will also privilege the knowledge, the norms, the values, and even the rules and beliefs of a certain context. this is the first group. And secondly, probably students and teachers who have received formal training involving, critical awareness of generative AI can benefit the most from using such tools, because we know AI has hallucination, right? It can create, for example, references that simply don't exist. If you ask it to do literature review, it can generate references that are not there, right? So it's AI hallucination. So people really need to develop critical awareness. They cannot take AI for granted because it can produce inappropriate, incorrect, inconsistent answers, right? So actually we say that GenAI tools can be very, very dangerous if we use it without critical awareness. For one, it's biased itself. For two, we use it in a biased way too. So our prompts, our responses also train our own unique AI. So my AI is entirely different from your AI actually, because the data, the algorithm has been trained by my own use and prompts, right? So we say that if we are not aware of such danger or such opportunities, we can also call it opportunities, and we don't integrate critical digital or critical AI awareness or literacies into our learning and teaching programs, it's highly possible that our students, our teachers will actually fall behind as an entire generation, because they lack the critical awareness, they lack the literacies to know AI in a critical, ethical way. And I think the third question is about how the novice teachers use AI to move beyond the cultural learning experiences. Right, so this is very important. I'm also trying to do that in my own courses, because we know that novice teachers, non-native English teachers, and actually teachers who are powerless relatively compared to native English teachers in the American context, actually they really need to develop such critical digital literacies and awareness to move beyond the cultural learning. Because if they rely on, for example, GenAI to create teaching materials and teaching content, it's highly possible that the output will be based on or privileging a certain group. That is what the algorithm is trained based on, right? And probably we need to train our AI.
May I, sorry, interrupt you here, just to clarify something? Based on what you have just said, what do you think about Ray, who does not rely on AI that much and who doesn't want to develop the generative AI learning patterns and work? So do you think that he is one of the teachers who might fall behind the technology used for teaching?
Yeah, thank you so much. I do believe so, actually, because he is not using AI. He will not use AI, actually, right, in his future learning teaching practices. And this is also why probably partially because of his lack of training opportunities. But this also means that he will believe that AI is not important because this is where he studies, right? And in his future teaching practices, he will not teach his students to use AI because he believes that this is not important. He's already very confident about his own capabilities, everything, because he has a PhD. He is a very traditional theory-based teacher. So this is also a very extreme case that represents people who refuse to use AI. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Alessia, for your stimulating questions. We have Nazir as well. He would like to share his comments. Nazir, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Zong, for your wonderful presentation. I really like it from, I can say, from different perspectives. I feel it's like more embedded in cultural values, norms, and mostly in the context that I think is very important in the context of AI. Because mostly the studies, they look into very superficial things. Let's say they just see adoption, use, and integration, but they don't go that deep into how they can be integrated in the context, cultural values. And you raise a very important point. I think that is equity and inclusion. That is a critical landmark, especially when we look at it from the perspective of sustainable development goals. So it's quite a challenge maybe in future, that how can we ensure equity and inclusion in the context of using AI. And I think that I was feeling as a sense of feeling of critical pedagogy, as if I'm a bit close to a Ferrari and Henry Giroux. So I think I feel that feelings as well, which I really admire and I like it. But I will not repeat what Olesa said. I will try to make it not certain questions, but certain my commentary. You can say that whether you agree with it or you take it on, or it's up to you. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think there are two, three very critical dimensions in the study. Let's say, for example, when we talk about ethical use, right? So as we study and we go through in our own work, and we see that it is something like voluntarily or voluntarily, right? What the way I believe, my belief or my ideology, it's also something that I have some questions on ideology as well, right? We'll come to that later. But being ethical, I will decide whether it is ethical or not. Or maybe in some context that one action is ethical, in the other context it might not be that ethical, right? It may be ethical, not unethical, other way. So it is again the context that decide whether one thing is unethical or unethical. Maybe within the same context in different disciplines like health, education, and finance, maybe the same act somewhere will contrast with each other. So that I think we should be very, I think we should be very mindful of when we talk about whenever I review a paper, I say ethical use. So I say a big question: what do you mean by ethics, right? Because ethical cannot be standardized; it can be something universal, right? It is context specific, it vary context to context, discipline to discipline, right? So it's very specific to be clear. What do you mean by ethic? Number one. Number two, you talk about rightly that identity crisis. Yeah, I think this AI is worse than the identity crisis than before. And you rightly use a very good word for native speakerism, right? So it promotes more that kind of native speakerism. And now these days you can see the journals, they also promote this native speakerism by allowing AI use. You can edit, you can do something like, let's go to Scopus elsewhere, they have some softwares, and they allow you to use it. So there are some other interests involved, as well as the social, economical, and financial. Everything is involved in that. So we should also be mindful of that as well. So I think, yes, this dimension is very critical, but when you add ideology to it, ideology is something that I think it is very negative consequences as well as the positive, because in many countries, especially when I come from, they refer to ideology as the religious ideology as well, right? So when you involve this religious ideology, so things become very blurred, very blunt, because there is no logic in religious ideology. There's just no or yes, right? Accepted, not accepted. So you need to think about that, whether this ideology perspective could be used across contexts, universally, globally, or will it have generalizability in the other contexts or not? So what do you mean by ideology? Whether it is just my thought process, what I believe in, and how do you differentiate it between faith and ideology, right? Because they somewhere mix and they go together somewhere. So then things become very difficult. Because when I reject something through my ideology, so then there is no logical acceptance, right? Or when I accept something through ideology, then there is no something that some arguments to convince me to not do it, right? So things become then blurred and very constant, stagnant. So this is very critical point. And I also agree with your opinion that you use the word agency. Agency, I think for me is very, very important in the context of AI. Whether it is individual agency like digital competency or digital critical literacy, that's very, very important for me. The critical point, it's very critical to look at it, right? So how do institutes, how do organizations respond to that by taking certain measures? But just blaming AI or supporting AI is not the solution. I think how do the institutions respond? That is very important. But the issue is that, especially with the education sector, to be honest and to be sensitive with that, we're really very resistant to change, right? We always say that change is constant, change is the only constant, but we are always resistant to change from our side. We always say that whether AI, for example, AI suits our exam system, it must suit. Why don't we think with the other way? Why don't we change our exam systems? That may not be compatible with the AI use, right? We're not ready for that. We want AI to fit our situation, but we're not going to change our situation to fit the needs of the time or the needs of the AI. This, I think, is very, this compatibility issue, I think, is very important, that maybe in future you can look at it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, they are very good research topics. Oh, maybe I can start, addressing some of your observations. Thank you, really. I learned a lot from your sharing too. Thank you. So actually, let me start with the final question. This is a very good one, right? So do we really respond to AI tools by changing our systems, exams, structures, or do we change AI tools and adapt them to our systems, right? So I can only share with you how we do it in Hong Kong. So at the very beginning, actually, 5 or 3 years ago, we actually prohibit AI use, like from all 8 public universities led by Hong Kong U at the very beginning. And we believe that it's harmful because it will harm ethics, academic integrity, and honesty. This is the first question, right, that you had. This was also our concern like years ago. But then we realized that, as you probably have mentioned, we observed how students use AI, even though we ban them from doing so, right? So we do have AI detectors that can, tell us, oh, our students are using AI in both mainland Chinese and the Hong Kong context. So we really start to rethink, really, are we going to, just ban everything? No, the answer is actually no. And then we started to integrate actually AI into our learning teaching practices. Not just actually classroom learning, we even integrate AI into assessment and exams actually. So in May this year, our it's like a top-down but also bottom-up. So both the government and also the universities agree that we need to use AI now. And we do it by, for example, having our students submit an AI declaration form. So they need to use, they not need to use AI. Actually, most university professors in my context integrate AI into their teaching. So students need to use AI in some tasks, activities, and they need to submit a form to declare to what extent they use AI, for what purposes, in what tasks, in what ways. And then they submit a form attached to all their assignments. That's why we changed the exams, the assessment to different tasks that can have AI in it. Like students need to create something new. They don't just do stuff that AI can also do, like paraphrasing, like moderating, monitoring, or other stuff, right? They need to do something creative and critical, so that AI cannot help them. So that we need to distinguish which parts belong to students' original work, which parts belongs to AI. So this is what we are doing now. We both respond to different AI tools and their changes. For example, we have text-to-text, image, audio, video AI in our teaching. I use them to teach my students, and my students know how to use them to create their teaching materials. For example, they use Pictory to generate videos for their own English classes, and they know how to do it because it's necessary in the future. It will help them reduce the workload. Like just clicking on it, AI can create an English teaching video, including the audio. They can select what kind of English variety the audio or the voiceover is. Is it American English? Is it Chinese English? Right? They can choose it, and they know how to do it. So this is a part of what I called critical digital AI literacies or critical AI literacies. If the students have it, if the teachers have it, they know how to do it. They know how to do it ethically and critically. This is actually very meaningful for them because their future students will use it. Even though they don't, the students will use it, right? If they don't know why their students are using it, how they're using it, if they don't know how to distinguish ethical use from unethical use, how can they teach in the future? Because their students are AI generations. They're born with AI, so they naturally know how to use it. And let me come to the first question. What do we mean by ethics? Actually, yes, I totally agree that we need to reframe the notion of ethics. And similarly as ideology, they can be very different in different contexts, in different disciplines. For example, in my field, like educational linguistics and teacher education, we believe that or we say ethical use of AI is more like not just limited to how students will use it for maybe for cheating, maybe it's about academic honesty. It's not just that, it's beyond that actually. Whether students claim what AI creates to be their own is not the only thing that we care when it comes to AI ethics. If you're interested, I can share some readings with you. You can email me. So we really have a new definition about AI ethics in nowadays generation. And the second question is about blurred ideology in different contexts. For sure, actually, we believe that ideology is not fixed. It's changeable and it's always different in different contexts if we think about this, right? Even within an institution like your university, you have your own pedagogical ideology. You have your own educational pedagogy, language ideology. For example, you may use English sometimes, right? But you don't use an English-only policy because you believe that your Russian native language is also important. This is also your ideology, right? But in Hong Kong, for example, we have something different, and it's totally fine because we have different ideologies in different contexts. We just need to use AI in a way that can fit our own, context and can satisfy our students' needs. Yeah, thank you so much. And I can see one comment asking for the articles, so I've sent all the PDF files to you via the chat box. Thank you for liking them. Yeah, I hope you enjoy reading them. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Nazir. Thank you, Alessia, for your comments. We now have some time for an open discussion. So I invite participants to share their questions or reflections. You can raise a hand or type your question in the chat. But I already see some questions in the chat, so let me read it out loud. The first one, yes. Were there any questions about content knowledge of pre-service teachers using AI, about the points of interaction with AI? Examples of use words like advanced translator, better synonyms, or something else. Ellen, could you?
Thank you so much for the question. Actually, I'm writing a chapter for a handbook of GenAI use in higher education. And the chapter is exactly about, AI's role and, user identity. Actually, my initial finding is that AI can serve as different roles, not just translator. Actually, translator is more like a very first level of what AI can do. For example, it's like AI, traditional curational AI, like it can translate, it can answer questions, it can, find answers from, existing data sources. But what generative AI can do is much more than that. It can actually be the content creator. It can provide you with different answers from different perspectives because it relies on changing data sets, changing large language models. For example, like DeepSeek has a totally different data set from ChatGPT, right? So it actually is a content creator itself. For sure, it can be the facilitator of students' learning. It can even, help you to review your own work. It can be different roles, actually, very, very different roles. But we need to move beyond the traditional AI roles, like Siri's role, Google Translator's role, to generative AI's role. It's really like human being now. It can create videos, audios. It can even talk to you. It can be the grammar tutor who can talk to you as an English speaker, actually, like very synchronized way. And it can be a facilitator of a group. If you can Google the keyword Yo ChatGPT, it is a group ChatGPT. So a group of students can use the AI simultaneously. They can ask questions at the same time, and AI can create answers for all of them at the same time. And you, as teachers, we can see the answers. So this is perfect, right? So we can monitor the progress. If you want to do an experiment, you can do that too, right? So you can see before my class, our students use AI in this way. So different groups of students use AI in the same AI room, right? And after my intervention, they use it in a different way and stuff like that. Yeah, thank you so much for the question.
Thank you, Ellen. I see one more question from Julia. What, from your point of view, main predictors in creating teachers' critical thinking in general, and in particular in working with students with special needs?
I guess this is not about generative AI, right? So, and the use of words like predictor, I assume you are a quantitative scholar. I also do quantitative studies like experiments. So I guess based on my own reading, right? So critical thinking in general can be predicted by teachers' knowledge actually about critical norms and issues. The first thing may be knowledge and understanding. And you can see something like that in my own study, right? I also shared an experimental study with you, starting with Guan. If you're interested, you can take a look. It's also an experiment. The second predictor can be, I guess, critical thinking. Students' motivation for learning, right? So motivation for learning for example, the language, the content knowledge, whatever the subject that you are teaching. Yes, motivation. If they are more motivated to learn, and it's highly possible that they can achieve higher, right? So motivation is the predictor of achievement in general study. So critical thinking, I will assume is the same. I haven't done this. You can try it out. And in particular, working with students with special needs. For example, if we are working with students with ADHD, and they have problem focusing on a certain slide, right? And they have problems with reading and writing. So we need to, for example, create slides with larger fonts, with similar colors, etc., etc. So I assume that if we want to engage students with, for example, ADHD in critical thinking activities, we need to set the predictor as our own teaching, the teaching materials, the teaching style, the teaching strategy. If we're talking about students' own, characteristics, then it's probably more psycholinguistics. For example, it can be about their age, their gender, their I don't know, their own learning style, strategy, and aptitude, which are components of individual differences, right? And also probably cognitive load, right? Cognitive and also other, factors can also predict students' critical thinking in general. Yeah.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? No, I see no. And as we are coming to the end of our seminar, I would like to once again thank you, Ellen, for joining our seminar for today. And Ellen, would you like to share a few closing remarks before the wrap up?
For sure. Just thank you so much, Maxine. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Really appreciate the opportunity. It's very nice to talk to all of you. Yeah.
Thank you. So it means that we're coming to the end. Thank you, our dear discussants, Alessa and Nazir. Thank you, Ellen, for joining us from Hong Kong and sharing your studies. Please feel free to join us in the next in the upcoming sessions. And let me remind you about our next seminar. It will be next Tuesday, I guess, and it will be devoted to Soviet kindergarten. You can share your feedback in this feedback form. Please scan it, and I guess that's it. We can close our seminar. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and have a nice day.
Thank
Bye.
you. Have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you, Ellen.